The majestic appearance of the palace amazed the imagination of everyone who looked at it. Our heroine was born the first princess of the kingdom, and always lived for the sake of her brother, who would become king, her sister and parents, and most importantly, for the sake of the people. Her parents convinced her not to go out into secular society, asked her to leave it to her brother and sister, and said that they wanted to protect the girl in this way. She had no choice but to be glad that her family valued her so much. However, even so, she was still involved in political affairs, and devoted her free time to studying magic, so she felt her life was rich and happy. However, happiness was not destined to last forever, and the usual life was shattered on the day when the Chariot Empire declared war. The people suffered. The second Princess Nicole was taken hostage, and the royal family had no choice but to ask Lars, our heroine, to lend her enormous magical power. Giving all of herself to her loved ones and the kingdom, the princess agreed without hesitation to go to the battlefield. The raging flame flowed at her command, consuming everything it touched along the way. Even those who could no longer fight could not be left alive. Through the roar of the merciless elements, screams were heard begging for mercy. The princess hesitated, but she had no choice. The battle must be ended at all costs. For the sake of her family, for the sake of the people, and for the sake of those who stood next to her on this battlefield, she had to step over herself. And eventually, the fire consumed everything, leaving only smoldering embers and echoes of screams echoing in the memory. However, this was not enough to match the military might of the Chariot Empire, and all survivors were overtaken by the news that the Berry Kingdom had admitted defeat. Lars was captured, and the days ahead were pure hell. Once in prison, she could not believe her ears, because, as she was informed, her imprisonment was a condition for Nicole's return to her homeland. Our heroine denied to the last that such a thing was possible. Her own parents could not sell her, and even because they did not want to wait long for the rescue of the second princess. The nightmare continued, because the emperor himself appeared before her, a beautiful man with silver hair and a look as cold as his heart. He intended to make the princess his toy, to which she responded with open irritation. The strong-hearted girl, even in such a situation, refused to betray her country, because no matter what, she is still the proud princess of the Berry Kingdom, and she had to pay for her pride. The days that endlessly stretched one after another merged into a continuous stream of pain and despair. The emperor visited Lars from time to time, never giving up his attempts to make her his mistress. But the girl was adamant. No matter how she was tortured, she did not lose her royal pride. The emperor was unable to influence her in any way. Tired of endless attempts, he did what was least expected of him. With his magic, he healed the wounded girl. The man suddenly declared that his proposal was sincere, but after all this torture, hardly anyone would believe him. Finally, he called the princess the same as himself, so he hoped that she would understand him and sent her home. And so, 10 years later, Lars returned to her homeland, where a new hell awaited her. It turned out that she alone was blamed both for starting this war and for the further defeat. The family for whom she went through 10 years of suffering made her a scapegoat. Their mocking smiles, words, all their hatred for their sister who sacrificed herself for them became a new nightmare that overshadowed all the torture that our heroine had to go through. They never considered Lars' family. They only used her when and how they wanted. In the end, they declared that she was not the daughter of their father at all, but of his brother, whom the royal family hated to the core. In the end, everything was made out to look like the princess started a war just to show off her magical powers. They betrayed her, trampled on everything she treasured, leaving her to rot in prison and wait for her time. Only her servant, faithful to the very end, came to her to give her at least a little food. The desperate girl wanted to at least find out what had happened in the palace over all these years, because she did not want to die without knowing anything. The man, unable to help her in any way because of his position, told the princess everything he knew. Soon after this, they decided to execute Lars for crimes that she did not even commit. The girl who was just trying for the sake of her family, so happy just because she was appreciated. What happened to her? Images from the past flashed before my eyes. She stepped over herself so many times, and all for the sake of the people who stuck a knife in her back. The angry crowd, blinded by false accusations, demanded only one thing: the death of the unfortunate girl. Having gone through all this torment, the princess found herself at the very bottom of the abyss of despair, from where there was no turning back. The arrogant glances of the royal family cut into the girl like a knife. There was nothing left in her gaze except one question: why? Why did she, who gave everything for them, now have to die, branded with the greatest evil? She was not destined to find the answer, because the time had come, and the sentence was carried out. Or rather, this was supposed to happen. Not understanding anything, Lars looked around, trying to understand where she was and why she was still alive. The servants calmly went about their business as if nothing had happened. And the man she saw in the dungeon, why does he look younger? And not only him, the princess herself looked younger than during the war. One of the maids mentioned Nicole's recent birthday, which further confused our heroine. Having asked what year it was, Lars learned that she had found herself more than 10 years in the past. While she was in shock, the maids continued their daily conversations as if nothing had happened, as if all the horror that the princess had to endure did not exist at all. Trying to maintain composure, the girl decided to carry on the conversation, although it was difficult for her. And they were talking about a letter that said that they wanted to accept Princess Barry as Empress Chariot. Lars was flooded with memories of what Nicole's wedding to the Emperor had led to. Unable to believe what was happening, she looked in the mirror again, seeing in the reflection her younger self, still without the scars of war and torture. Will she really have to suffer again? An unwanted war, 10 years of imprisonment and torture, betrayal by those whom she considered the closest people, and in the end, such an unfair death. All these memories ate the girl from the inside. Did she really do anything to deserve this end? The distorted soul saw its former self in the mirror, wounded and devastated. Unable to bear such a load, Lars, in hysterics, broke the first thing she came to hand. For herself, the princess decided only one thing. She would never be able to forgive all those who caused her so much pain. Not the people of the empire who tortured her for 10 long years. Not her once beloved family who turned their backs on her. The girl stood silently, trying to collect her thoughts, while all the servants were frightened by her sudden behavior. Concerned guards burst into the room, ready to rush to the rescue at any moment. But Lars did not notice them, consumed by pain and hatred. Having finally calmed down, the heroine only said that she was simply having a hard time. She had a chance. A chance to change your personal nightmare, your life. Never again will she allow herself to be taken advantage of. At that moment, another maid entered the room with an important message. The king had called the whole family. Not understanding what was happening, she was only able to squeeze out a few broken phrases, but they were enough for Lars to understand the situation. Of course, she had already lived through this moment once, and it became a turning point in her life. The maid, having calmed down a little, conveyed to the princess the king's words, which she already knew. At the meeting, they would talk about a letter from the Chariot Empire. Determined to change her fate, our heroine agreed to come. But this time, she is no longer a sweet and naive girl, and she will no longer allow her so-called family to trample her life. The servant nearby knew exactly the whole truth about what was happening behind Lars's back. However, it is too early to reveal all the cards, and for now she will play along with everyone. After all, the letter didn't say that it was Nicole who should go, so why not take her place? Unlike the second princess, our heroine knew that this wedding was a trap to force Barry to capitulate in the war. She knew what consequences this union would lead to, which means she could influence further events for the better. No one will dare to falsely blame the girl for all the troubles anymore. If people want to see her as a villain, well, she will be one. And so the family meeting began, and just like the last time, the choice immediately fell on Nicole. It was she who everyone wanted to see as the empress. According to all the rules, the first princess should have been chosen, but the past Lars simply supported her sister. Back then, she still sincerely considered Nicole to be her sweet little sister who deserved all the best. But now she understood that, unlike the second princess, whom everyone loved, Lars was just an empty place for everyone. The one who always worked harder than anyone else was simply thrown onto the battlefield, forced to give up everything to save Nicole. For the sake of her family, the princess was willing to kill people, put herself in danger, and was ready to do anything. But in the end, she was considered an unnecessary thing, kept nearby only because she could be sold profitably. And while everyone was saying that Nicole should become the empress, Lars took the first step towards her new life by objecting to this. Of course, everyone was worried. Shouldn't she support her little sister? But our heroine did not even think of retreating. She stated that the second princess would certainly become a worthy empress, but her fiancé was known as a ruthless tyrant. There are countless people who were executed at his one word, and Nicole, who was raised in love, will probably be afraid of him. This man killed his own father with his own hands. Such a tender girl cannot be given to him. Our heroine knew from her own experience how dangerous this man was, but it was better to go to him than to stay with those who were ready to betray her at the first opportunity. Yes, he did not even treat his own subordinates with humanity. But even so, next to him, the chance to change everything is much higher than in a family of traitors. Continuing her speech, Lars mentioned that the emperor, among other things, also has 6 concubines who are ready to kill each other for his favor. Nicole will have to endure such an attitude towards herself on a foreign land, and alone, is it possible to send her there? All these arguments gave the royal family pause, and Lars continued to play the loving sister who cannot doom her sweet little sister to such torment. In the past, Nicole wanted to escape from the empire within a month. The conditions there were truly unbearable for such a little girl. Therefore, our heroine proposed her candidacy, and unlike Nicole, she was confident that she could handle everything herself. Continuing to act out her performance, the princess said that for the sake of her sister, she was ready to become a substitute. In the past, our heroine was really ready to give her life for Nicole until she saw that mocking smile. And while everyone was uttering hypocritical words of support, Lars only thought that this time it would not be her who would be thrown out. And so, after some time, the wedding took place. The neglect, indifference, loneliness that awaited Lars in this marriage did not bother her at all. Compared to the war, where you had to step over yourself over and over again, burning countless people to the ground, this is nothing. She had to go through too much in these 10 years, including her own death, so unfair and merciless. And now our heroine has a new goal. She will personally conquer Barry. Meanwhile, the ceremony was coming to an end. 2 cold eyes met to conclude this alliance without a drop of feelings. The rays of the setting sun illuminated the scene of the kiss of people as beautiful on the outside as they were cold on the inside. But let's digress for a moment and talk about magic. The flame of the Barry Kingdom, the healing power of the Sharialt Empire, they were united by the fact that pure-blood members of the ruling families are the most talented magicians. And our heroine was extraordinary even compared to her family, which was one of the reasons why she was considered the heir of her uncle and not the king. He possessed the most powerful magic in the kingdom, and the queen was once betrothed to him, but ended up choosing the first prince to become king. In turn, Emperor Shariel, Zephan Barb Verbena, was the son of one of the 10 concubines of the first ruler and the owner of the most powerful magic in his family. Let's return to the ceremony. It ended with the fact that after saying a few sarcastic words, Zephan simply walked away, leaving Lars alone. The only person the former princess, now empress, could really rely on was her servant Shin, the same man who told her about everything that happened in the empire during her imprisonment. It would have been wiser to take a maid with him, but as a sign of gratitude, the choice fell on him. It cannot be said that Lars trusted him completely, but he was always on her side. The more the girl talked to him, the more it seemed to her that he was not a person at all. He always did his job unquestioningly, but could never establish communication with others. When all the people began to hate the princess, Shin became her servant and helped as much as he could, without any prejudice. And for this, Lars was truly grateful to him, unlike the local maids, who didn't pay attention even when called, causing all the work to fall on Shin's shoulders. Of course, this is much better than her life in a dungeon. But our heroine is no longer going to live a life in which she must endure. It's time to change this dismissive attitude. After asking for water, she prevented Shin from doing all the work again. Instead, she grabbed one of the maids who had been ignoring her until now, which she clearly did not expect. Lars, lighting a flame in her hand, asked who gave the order to ignore her. Frightened for her life, the maid immediately revealed that it was all the work of the senior maid, after which she ran to get a glass of water for our heroine. The empress, having received the glass, immediately poured it on the girl, but only so that she could lie that she had not said anything, for which she was punished. Realizing the situation, the grateful maid hurried away. Meanwhile, Lars was thinking about this order. If she had been her former self, she would have even been a little hurt by such an attitude. But after everything she had experienced, it was a mere trifle. But this does not mean that such things should be allowed to happen. After interviewing the other maids, she was convinced that the order was indeed given to the senior maid, which means it's time to give her a warm welcome, because they clearly have something to talk about. But let's go back briefly to the past, namely Nicole, who tore a toy she didn't like into shreds and demanded a new one. Her brother, who refuses to study because it's boring for him. And our heroine, once diligent and full of kindness to everyone, the key word is once. After all, while she was destroying the room, there was only one thought in her head. Being broken is always so exciting. The head maid was shocked by what she saw, but Lars only asked why no one comes to do the cleaning. Not knowing what to do, the woman simply stood silently in the midst of the chaos. And our heroine continued her performance, playing the unfortunate cutie, who was so lonely all these days. The head maid responded by saying that she had nothing to do with it, and if this was her order, Shouldn't Lars have realized her power and sat quietly? Having received nothing in response, the woman went completely wild, showering the Empress with her disdain. And at some point, she finally crossed the line, causing Lars to lose her temper. Which means now it's our heroine's turn to show who has power here and who is just a servant. There is no longer any need to hide your intentions in front of this woman who is not aware of her situation. Not expecting a rebuff, the head maid was seriously frightened, but she still knew what awaited her next. After all, Lars decided to clearly explain to her that she was not going to tolerate such an attitude. One after another, the words came out of her mouth, clearly making it clear that even if something happened, the Emperor would not care about some maid, after which she took the scissors. Of course, when the woman saw this, she was horrified, and Lars just said that since this was the first time, she would limit herself to hair. Despite all the requests to stop, the Empress, of course, began to punish, and of course did not stop when she injured the maid's cheek because she was struggling. And again screams, but not on the battlefield, but from a woman who dared to go against our heroine. So much screaming over such a trifle, Lars again began to remember the years of torture, which only angered her even more. The maid in tears asked to stop, said that she would order the room to be cleaned, that she would admit her guilt, but this was no longer important. Unfortunately for the woman, Lars is no longer the sweet and kind girl she was in her previous life. The next morning the whole room was sparkling clean, having been cleaned overnight by the head maid alone. Our heroine, as if nothing had happened, enjoyed a cup of aromatic tea, expressing serenity with her entire appearance. And rumors were already circulating around the palace about the princess, who in her homeland was known as a villain and who was now abusing the maids. According to these rumors, Lars deposed her brother Eric, the heir to the throne, constantly raised taxes and held parties. She threatened the king more than once, rewrote the entire law, planned her country's trade routes so that the allies would attack ships. In the eyes of the people, our heroine was the embodiment of evil, a gloomy puppeteer who plays with people, destroying destinies for the sake of fun. Moreover, unlike the royal family, her hair was not golden but black, and she was eventually nicknamed the Bat Princess. Meanwhile, news of what happened to the head maid reached Zephon, but, as expected, he was indifferent. Lars was equally indifferent. Now she was not worried at all about rumors or maids, because she had received an invitation to a tea party and was wondering whether to go. Sudden anger enveloped the heroine when she realized who exactly sent the invitation. The fourth concubine, Elisa Annette, who in her past life regularly came to the dungeon to mock Lars. She and her retinue tortured the poor girl over and over again. Their words were not comparable to the wound from the sword, but they hurt the pride of the princess, who at that time was still loyal to the kingdom. Even when Lars was deprived of her sight, she and the whole crowd looked at the heroine like a beast and grinned at her. However, the anger quickly receded, leaving room for one simple desire, namely the desire for revenge. It was time for a tea party, at which all the talk was about how terrible Lars is, and how noble, on the contrary, Elisa is. The Empress, however, missed this chatter and appeared a little later, carefully hiding her hostility towards everyone present here. No matter how hard Elisa tried to portray a warm welcome, the wounds left by her words were still fresh in her memory. Among all these people, there was only one girl who had treated Lars kindly in the past, but apparently she was not present at the tea party. But there were all those who were eager to mock the Bat Princess from Barry. Elisa started talking about our heroine's hair, different from the golden locks of the royal family, without even hinting, but directly calling her an illegitimate child. But Lars didn't care about their words. On the contrary, she saw an opportunity in them. After all, she is the legal wife of the emperor, unlike the others, which means that if they have children, then they will definitely be illegitimate. Children who will become a disgrace to the family. There will be a huge number of rumors around them, and in their veins there will be only half royal blood, which is why they are unlikely to be loved by their own father. Not expecting to hear this, Elisa lost her temper, while our heroine just smiled sweetly and clearly enjoyed what was happening. But the time for a meal with the emperor was approaching, which Lars did not forget to mention to emphasize their closeness before leaving this den of snakes. Having finally thrown a couple of sarcastic phrases, she left, leaving after this tea party in high spirits. Unlike the fourth concubine, who was seriously offended by such words and behavior, now she saw in the Empress not just her rival, but her sworn enemy. Lars stuck tightly in her head, causing her to become more and more inflamed. Elisa recalled how close she was with the Emperor once. However, he had cooled off lately, just as Lars showed up. As a result, the girl firmly decided to achieve the expulsion of the Empress from the palace at any cost. It couldn't be that His Majesty really had feelings for her? Noticing workers nearby who were repainting the walls, Eliza immediately came up with a way to annoy our heroine. Meanwhile, Lars was preening before the joint meal. The Emperor needs this marriage to get a hostage from Barry, which means that in order to avoid another imprisonment, he needs to prove his worth to him. Luckily, Lars has more than enough information to draw on and offer. While she was preparing for the meeting, the Empress received a message supposedly from the Emperor, but immediately realized that this was a trick because he had no need to write to her. However, any trick can be turned to your advantage, which Lars decided to take advantage of. There was no one at the place indicated in the message. And while the heroine was trying to understand what exactly her ill-wishers were up to, she was doused with paint. And Eliza again, who else could it be? Lars simply silently looked at the offenders, but not at all from shock. She simply has no need to waste her time on such trifles. The Emperor saw everything that happened, but of course he did not interfere, and he left before he could find the heroine not only not saddened by what happened, but even joyful. Zephon waited for his wife for a long time, and despite all his insensitivity, never touched the food. But his patience does not last forever, and besides, he did not understand the situation at all, and decided that Lars was just a weakling, who was probably now locked in the room and sobbing. However, right before he left the room, his wife appeared in front of him, shocking him with her new appearance. In a previous life, after going through the same thing, Nicole threw a tantrum. Tired of being treated like nothing, she simply couldn't stand it. This is not surprising, because the very young girl was bullied by everyone around her. As a result, unable to bear it any longer, she wrote a letter in which she complained about the injustice happening to her in the hope that her sister would come and solve all her problems. But let's return to the present, where the meal has already begun. The heroine simply silently looked at her husband, waiting for his reaction. Her hair, once the color of the night sky, now shimmered gold. Even a person like Zephon was surprised by what he saw. In fact, black was never her natural color. Her parents forced her to wear makeup, supposedly to protect her from those who might covet her magical abilities. Lars continued to dye her hair just to avoid unnecessary fuss, but now there was no need for it. Golden or silver hair was a symbol of royal blood and an indicator of outstanding magical abilities. And the heroine's family, under the guise of concern, forced Lars to hide this color in order to destroy her reputation. Just the reflection of gold in her hair already showed what she was worth. Meanwhile, the Emperor still could not hide his surprise. In an attempt to calm down, he emptied his glass without even touching his food. The lack of understanding of what was happening put a lot of pressure on his nerves. Trying to find a logical explanation for the situation, he assumed that Lars had dyed her hair gold. However, she denied these words, saying that this was her natural color, and she had to hide it because of family rules. The Emperor began to ask about the reasons for the emergence of such rules, to which Lars replied that for the sake of her brother and sister, who were less gifted in magic. After all, if people find out that in the royal family there is someone stronger than the heir to the throne, in their eyes he will be weak, and Nicole, in turn, had a less pure shade, which could affect her reputation in secular society. And the Emperor continued his questioning. He didn't understand. Isn't it better to make the one who is stronger the heir? In order not to reveal the fact that she was simply taken advantage of, our heroine decided to answer these questions evasively, pretending that everything was actually logical. In the end, she simply changed the topic, focusing on how she and Zephon suited each other. However, the Emperor was as cold as always, and said that there are enough women in the palace who are of much greater value, and our heroine is just a political tool. But Lars was not going to agree to this so easily, because she is much more valuable than any of Zephon's concubines. Such a statement seriously infuriated His Majesty, who did not want to recognize our heroine as a full-fledged empress. Before her, there were many women who tried to get close to him, and what happened to them in the end? Zephon directly told the heroine that if she continued in the same spirit, death would await her. However, Lars was not bothered by his words, because she had information that would undoubtedly interest the Emperor and make her truly valuable in his eyes. She uttered only one phrase, White Meridian, and this was enough to interest Zephon. After all, this is the name of a merchant ship on which the entire fate of the Charial Empire depended. Its route skirted most of the continent, and for the empire located in the cold region, this ship was an indispensable way to extract resources. And Lars knew that in a month this ship would be attacked by the allies of the Barry Kingdom. The entire crew will be killed, and the goods will be stolen, putting the Charial Empire at a severe disadvantage, while Barry and Capricorn will receive unprecedented benefits. Lars tried to stop her father in a past life, because Nicole at that moment was Empress Chariot. But no one began to listen to her, because friendly relations with the Empire were only a pretense. The princess was convinced that this was necessary for both Barry and Capricorn. Besides, if everything goes smoothly, the Empire won't even know who was behind everything. One by one, the king's words made Lars believe that the Barrys were doing the right thing, and that it was for Nicole's sake first and foremost. As a result, all the blame was placed on the Kingdom of Castle, where White Meridian stayed for the last time. The Empire managed to recover all the losses, but it took a lot of time and effort. But the real culprits, who made huge profits, were never found. Therefore, our heroine decided to prevent this incident. She said that she knew the exact time and place of the attack, and the Emperor, although he did not trust her words, was still interested in this information. Lars offered to check if she was right, because she still had a lot of useful knowledge that could prove her worth. However, she did not reveal all her cards at once, because her goal now was to intrigue Zephan, and she managed to achieve her goal. The Emperor became interested in our heroine, and now he could no longer harm her before she told everything she knew. He agreed to check the information about the attack on the ship, and said that if Lars was right, he would recognize its value. The heroine only smiled in response, confident that she was right. She didn't care about Zephan's words about what consequences awaited her if she lied. Although the Emperor did not trust her, this was only for now. And sometime later, rumors about what happened reached Eliza. She appeared before the Emperor with golden hair and also bargained with him. The fourth concubine, who already hated the Empress, decided to make her regret it at all costs. Meanwhile, our heroine calmly enjoyed reading, gradually planning her further actions. A maid came into the room to deliver an urgent message. Lars reluctantly looked away from her thoughts. The letter turned out to be torn to shreds, and the maid said that it was like that originally. Putting the pieces together, the Empress realized that the message was from her father. Not wanting to have anything to do with him, she simply brushed off the letter. Scraps of paper, on which feigned words of tenderness and concern were written, flew into the trash bin. Although this letter was not something important for Lars, she was not going to allow such an attitude towards herself. And she already guessed who broke it, because the same thing happened to Nicole in the past. Our heroine decided to meet with the culprit, and in the near future there was just a reason. A Christmas party, at which all the concubines would be present. Lars, already anticipating her revenge, asked Shin to tell her that she would come too. The faithful servant, of course, went to carry out this order, and our heroine, thoroughly enjoying what was happening, decided to go for a walk. The greenhouse, which was more like an entire garden, was breathtaking. A huge room in which, despite the cold outside, it seemed like a separate world, full of greenery and flowers. Lars happened to meet a young girl there, drinking tea alone. Noticing our heroine, she jumped up in fear. She immediately recognized Lars as the Empress, although she was surprised by the color of her hair. The heroine, full of calm, confirmed that she was indeed Zephan's wife. The awkward girl immediately began to apologize for interfering with the walk. Lars finally realized who was in front of her, the third concubine of the Emperor, Sasha Lebedeva. Our heroine was wary of the girl, because she was not sure who bullied her in a past life after she was deprived of her sight. When asked why she was so nervous, even though she was elected emperor, Sasha replied that this was not so. She had no power, and she became a concubine only for the sake of establishing diplomatic relations. Deciding that she could get a lot of useful information from this girl, Lars invited her to have a cup of tea together. And so, the drink and delicious desserts were served. Sasha sincerely admired the taste, or maybe she just played well. This was still unknown to our heroine. The conversation turned to sweets that would go with tea. And then the heroine realized that she had absolutely no understanding of either popular snacks or, in general, the latest fashion trends. Her family kept her away from society, and Lars simply could not know such things. Despite the fact that her heart was covered with a layer of ice after all the events she had experienced, our heroine was still embarrassed by such a situation. Noticing this, Sasha hastened to calm her down, and Lars changed the subject. She began to ask about the other concubines of the Emperor, and her interlocutor was not at all opposed to sharing knowledge. Most of these girls were chasing the title of Empress, but Zephan showed no interest in them. There have been cases where women have lost their lives trying to seduce him with their beauty, because he is only interested in those who have value. And the closest thing to this was a girl, after whose appearance no one aspired to the title of Empress, the sixth concubine, who got rid of everyone who came close to Zephan. And Lars was worried that such a woman was still sitting quietly, unlike Eliza. The fourth concubine, in turn, is very jealous and generally hostile towards all the girls near the Emperor. She plotted various schemes to become Zephin's wife, and in comparison, her group was one step ahead of the sixth concubine. Sasha, however, escaped all these intrigues. She was simply not taken into account because of her appearance. She asked Lars to be careful, especially with Eliza. In response to this, the Empress directly asked why the girl was helping her. Sasha replied that she was already glad that she was allowed to live in the palace, and that she would not dare to go against the legitimate wife of the Emperor. After all, she shouldn't have been in this palace in the first place. After a stream of self-deprecating statements, the heroine decided to help this girl at least a little. Even if these were just words, the Empress supported Sasha, letting her know that she was better than she said about herself. In addition, the heroine finally remembered her voice asking for forgiveness. The third concubine was the same person who sincerely apologized for everything that was happening and offered pain-killing wine, the only girl who at least somehow tried to help. Then Lars couldn't immediately believe her. She decided that the wine was poisoned, because such a kind person couldn't be in such a place. In response to the rudeness, Sasha asked only one thing: to let her pray for our heroine. As always, the girl, unfair to herself, sincerely tried to do at least something for her captive. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she, unable to change her fate, prayed for Lars. After Sasha left, the princess nevertheless decided to drink the remaining wine that had spilled on the floor. There was no poison in it. Memories forced the heroine to reconsider her suspicious attitude towards the girl. Maybe she doesn't know the third concubine that well yet. But full of gratitude for everything, the Empress decided to get closer to this girl at all costs when she removed all the obstacles from her path. And now it's time for the Christmas party. New rumors about the Empress circulated among the people, about her hair color, powerful magic, and how she was suitable for the role of Empress. And there was someone who was not at all happy about these rumors. The fourth concubine, who doesn't even try to hide her hostility. Appearing at the reception, our heroine attracted the attention of all those present with just her appearance. And of course, this greatly hurt Eliza's pride. She immediately came up to greet Lars, smiling falsely, and showering her with rather offensive words. Eliza decided to piss off the heroine without even trying to veil her insults. However, Lars easily parried her words, making them look like a compliment. By doing this, she angered the fourth concubine even more, who could hardly control herself. Not wanting to continue this conversation, the heroine said that she still needed to greet the party organizer, and then left, leaving Eliza alone with her anger. But the retinue of the fourth concubine did not want to leave everything as it was. Finally, one of the girls tripped the Empress, and although Shin managed to catch Lars, she remembered those who accompanied Eliza. At that moment, the princess who organized the party approached, so our heroine pretended as if nothing had happened. While she exchanged warm greetings, the girls, even more irritated by her calmness, looked at her back. Everyone at the reception discussed the beauty of the Empress, while Eliza and her retinue threw mud at her, unable to join the conversation with those around her. They again thought about how to annoy Lars, not understanding what awaited them for this. Blinded by their anger, they could only make plans, unable to actually do anything. They did not have to wait long for a new meeting with the Empress. She herself approached the girls. Eliza asked why Lars came, as always with a hint of mockery. To this, our heroine calmly replied that she just wanted to chat. However, her gaze was not fixed on the fourth concubine, but on the girl, because of whom she almost fell earlier. A scream suddenly sounded in the banquet hall. Lars simply shut the offender's mouth, quietly telling her to shut up. And the reason for this scream was a sharp heel that pierced the delicate skin of a girl who did not at all expect such consequences for her actions. When asked what she allowed herself to do, the Empress replied that she was simply teaching these girls etiquette, since it was impossible for them to continue to behave this way in decent society. You can gather people around you as much as you like, change tactics one after another. Eliza will still never get the attention of the Emperor. After all, in his eyes, this girl had no value, which the heroine said directly. Driven into rage, the fourth concubine threw a shard of glass at Lars. Her retinue tried to calm her down, saying that even she was not allowed to behave like that with the Empress, but it was too late. Our heroine could ignore any offensive words, but she will not allow anyone to treat her like that. Expressing no emotion, she slowly picked up a knife from a nearby table. Confident that she was Zephin's favorite, Elisa continued to egg Lars on. She believed that our heroine was bluffing and would not do anything, fearing the Emperor's wrath, but she was wrong. Of course, Lars did not intend to injure the girl, but cutting her dress was not difficult. All these events were seen by many people, and no one rushed to the girl's aid except her retinue. And our heroine, handing the knife to her servant, only said that Eliza should say such things to her reflection in the mirror and not to other people. The humiliated girl could only stare back angrily, unable to do anything, and the heroine continued her monologue, saying that the emperor would not protect either her or Eliza. Otherwise, the two of them were capable of protecting himself, and so it is clear. The figure towering over the humiliated girl, such a scene has already happened in the past. However, this time they switched places. Pleased with this outcome, Lars grinned haughtily at her offender. The guests present at the party, contrary to Eliza's expectations, sided with the empress and discussed how pathetic the fourth concubine was. Our heroine has gone through too much to break down because of some concubine. She said that Eliza could come at any time, the outcome would not change. And from the sidelines, what was happening was observed by someone with whom the heroine did not particularly want to get involved. The emperor's sixth concubine, Camilla Krasinski. She hadn't paid much attention to Lars before because she didn't consider her a rival, but now she realized she was wrong about that. Meanwhile, the silence of the night was broken by the sound of wheels and hooves. Emperor Zephan arrived at the party and wondered how Lars would behave in front of his concubines. In his eyes, she was a gentle and innocent girl, hardly capable of fighting back. Entering the hall, he immediately realized that something was wrong here. The reception was in full swing, and everyone had gathered in one place. His gaze fell on Eliza, who was just at that time walking away, hiding behind a piece of fabric. Zephan began asking people about what happened here. Very nervous, the girls who saw what happened tried to explain everything. However, the emperor considered himself above talking to them and ordered silence. All the information was given to him by his personal servants, who had already managed to find out what had happened. When he understood everything, Eliza's carriage was already driving away, taking away the humiliated girl. The emperor did not expect this from Lars at all. Now he was really interested in her. Now it became clear to him that our heroine was not at all as weak as it seemed at first glance. All the girls before her lost heart as soon as they encountered Eliza and Camilla. He thought that Lars would retreat if he scared her a little. But our heroine is not like her predecessors. She responds to her offenders with her head held high, not afraid to do things that are crazy by the standards of others. The emperor wondered how she would react to his appearance at the banquet. His gaze was cold as usual, but in his thoughts he was seriously intrigued. When he found Lars, she didn't look scared or upset. She didn't even pay attention to the wound on her cheek. She seemed to be somewhere not here, in her own world. However, the appearance of Zephan brought her back to reality. The empress did not at all expect to meet him here. When asked what she had done here, the heroine replied that everything was fine, and that everyone was very happy about her visit, avoiding talking about the torn dress. Then the emperor asked her directly about this, and realizing that there was no point in hiding it, the heroine only smiled in response, confirming his suspicions. It was clear that she was proud of herself, and this irritated Zephan. Eliza controlled 70% of trade with the kingdom of Yulain, which had previously refused to have any diplomatic relations with Sherial. And now, if because of this incident relations with the count are severed, then ties with the ruler of Yulain will also be severed. The heroine pretended to be sorry, and lowering her eyes, apologized. However, she immediately made it clear that it was just a game, asking with an arrogant look why Zephan needed Eliza if he now had Lars. At that moment, the princess arrived with a doctor, concerned about the empress's wound. However, the emperor pushed the doctor away, knocking over his suitcase with medicines to the floor. He could not allow such impudence to a girl who had not yet proven her worth, and was already declaring that no one else was needed except her. Concerned guests stood silently aside, afraid to make a sound. And Lars, full of confidence, said that very soon the emperor himself would see and understand everything. Her words did not inspire much confidence, but Zephan was too shocked by the fearless nature of the heroine and could not answer anything. And the empress calmly wiped away the blood with her finger. An unexpected gesture on her part surprised everyone present even more. She gently applied her blood to the emperor's lips. The already shocked man could only listen to the fact that he should be patient. Some time later, the heroine examined the place of the cut in the mirror. Thanks to the healing magic that Sherial specializes in, not a trace remained of the wound. Shin looked at the girl without expressing any emotion. But, although you couldn't tell from him, he was worried about her and at the same time admired how she withstood all the problems. The empress noticed his gaze, from which it was still impossible to understand what the man was thinking about. She suggested that he call a doctor if he, too, was hit by shrapnel, suggesting that this was the reason for such an intense gaze. Shin refused, saying that even if there were minor wounds, he could take care of them himself. A little upset by this answer, the heroine still did not argue with him. The servant quickly changed the subject, mentioning the toy Lars had taken with her. It was the same bear that Nicole tore, and the man asked whether to throw it away or fix it. Indifferent as it might seem to everything, the heroine asked him to sew it up, apparently unable to completely let go of childhood grievances. Lars asked about Eliza's condition after what happened at the party. The fourth concubine hasn't done anything special since then. Even the regular tea parties she held have stopped. The Empress was upset by this answer because she was hoping to have a little more fun, but in the end, she eliminated her rival without making much effort. And since Eliza was no longer causing problems, it was time to deal with the Emperor's wrath. This will not be much of a problem because she has the best weapon in such a situation, her memories from her past life. Even though she spent 10 years in captivity, cut off from the rest of the world, Shin told her everything. Lars said out loud that she was alive thanks to him, but the man did not hear it, and the girl pretended that she didn't say anything. Although she was grateful, there was no time for such thoughts now. As far as Lars knew, the neighboring states had always feared the Chariot Empire, which was the central topic of all rumors. And there was only one reason for this fear. Emperor Zephan, who was known primarily for his cruelty. The main reason that he had so many concubines was that the empire needed to somehow establish diplomatic relations. And relations with Ulain, Eliza's homeland, have always been especially tense. And then the heroine remembered something that would help her establish both diplomatic and personal relationships at once. Holding the king's doll in her hands, she had already begun to think through her plan. After all, King Yulin, as she knows from her past life, was soon to die. In the past, this event shocked all people, but it is not too late to change it and benefit. Lars asked Shin to apply to leave the palace, and he began preparations. And our heroine was already anticipating her triumph, knowing in advance what and how she should do. Meanwhile, the palace was restless. The emperor, as always, took a tough approach to solving problems, which is why his orders were sometimes extremely dangerous for ordinary people. So this time, he ordered to find a port for the ship, not paying attention to whether it was friendly. He couldn't think about it for a long time, because all his thoughts were filled with the image of his wife, who managed to truly interest him. He remembered the gentle touch of her fingers on his lips, which had the iron taste of blood. Zephan only now realized how deeply this girl was stuck in his head. The emperor just grinned, wondering what else Lars would do to gain his favor. And after some time, he found out that our heroine wants to go on a trip. He didn't like this at all. After all, the destination is the kingdom of Yulin, the homeland of Eliza. After what happened, the man decided that Lars's target was the fourth concubine. He decided that the place and time of the trip was not just a coincidence. At the same time, the Empress asked to say at least something. In response, she received a statement that her too calm face angered Zephan. Lars said that she would spend no more than 2 days there and would return as soon as she had finished all her business. Without waiting for an answer, our heroine simply confronted the emperor with the fact that she would go. The answer was not at all what she thought, because the emperor insisted on going together. Just as Lars had done before, he simply said that he would go with her, and he did not consider any other options. Zephan, noticing the heroine's confusion, asked if there was a reason why his wife did not want to go with him. Not understanding why Zephan needed this, the heroine, slightly nervous, agreed. His Majesty was reminded that he was already booked for the duration of the trip. But the emperor didn't care, after all. He makes his own schedule and can change it as he wants. And Lars tried to understand what Zephan was up to and why he needed this joint trip. But she didn't worry about it for long, because it's even better. She'll have a chance to get closer to the emperor. As always, confident in herself, the heroine was preparing to leave. And rumors that the imperial couple would spend the night together outside the castle spread throughout the palace, even reaching Eliza's ears. Everyone was trying to understand how a man whom people compared to an ice cube decided to do this, because before that, he had never even gone anywhere with concubines. Sometime later, the heroes arrived at an inn on the outskirts of Ulain. And there was one fact that made Lars nervous. Full of calm, the emperor looked indifferently at the cause of her concern. There was only one bed in the room, and it was designed for 2. Just in case, the empress clarified whether this was definitely their bedroom and not a separate room for Zephan. To which the inn worker replied that there was no mistake here, and the emperor personally asked for a room for the spouses. It was quite difficult to believe such a thing. Such a cold person couldn't suddenly want to get close to her. Zephan asked why Lars was so surprised, and she, not knowing how to react, simply said that everything was fine. Time passed, and the couple simply sat silently in front of each other. This situation depressed the girl. She still could not understand why Zephan did this. Lars constantly looked at her watch with concern, no longer so sure that she would have time to do what she came for. She was sure that they would move into different rooms, and now they even have dinner together. Although the Emperor was absolutely calm, the same could not be said about our heroine. And most of all, she was worried about the question, why is there only one bed? All this time, Zefan simply silently looked at Lars, making her even more nervous. The girl constantly looked at her watch, which attracted his attention. The Emperor asked what was the matter and what she was waiting for so much. Lars tried to dodge the question, but in such a situation she lost her usual calmness, and her answer sounded unconvincing. Zefan had long ago realized that this was not just a journey, but he never found out why exactly the heroine started all this. He ordered to interview all the locals, but never found any information that could help him understand everything. Lars, having pulled herself together, did not show that she was up to something, which confused the Emperor even more. The man's gaze fell on Shin, who had been next to his mistress all this time. He asked if these two were really always together, to which the heroine replied that it was so, because Shin was the only one who was on her side from the very beginning. The Emperor continued to ask about the servant. He was surprised that Lars even took him with her to another country instead of choosing a maid for herself. With such behavior, he surprised the heroine, who did not expect such interest. Since she had the chance, she wanted to tease Zefan a little. Lars asked if the Emperor, known for his indifference, was jealous. However, he sharply replied that this was out of the question. A little upset by the unsuccessful attempt to slightly mock, the Empress only smiled sweetly. And now it's time to get ready for bed. The heroine, who had been watching the clock all this time, realized that it was time for her to go. She ordered Shin to prepare the carriage, intending to carry out her plan. When asked what business she was leaving for, Lars replied that it was just a small job. She was about to go out the door, but then she was stopped. Zefan grabbed her hand, clearly not wanting to let go so easily. But he had no intention of finding out where Lars was in such a hurry. Instead, he mentioned that they never spent the night together after the wedding. This was the last thing the girl expected. The man threw her onto the bed, making it clear that he was not joking. Lars did not understand what came over her always indifferent husband, and he, in turn, was clearly going to see the matter through to the end. He said that a husband and wife should be enjoying the night together, so why leave? At some point, Lars completely ceased to understand what was happening and why Zefan began to behave this way. But let's pause for a moment to find out what was happening at this very time in a past life. The noise outside the door disturbed the Emperor, who was already irritated from working until late at night. Nicole entered the room, although the servants tried their best to stop her. Zefan immediately ordered her to be taken out, but she continued to stand her ground. The girl said that she needed to say something very important that could not be put off. She began by apologizing for not being able to attend the meal together. Nicole stood in tears, hoping that the Emperor would understand her, or rather, she pretended that everything was exactly like that. However, he was cold, as always, and simply continued to do his work. The girl, who actually didn't come to apologize at all, decided to move on since a pretty face and tears didn't work. She began to talk about how much she loved Zefan, simultaneously managing to complain about Eliza's bullying. But the result was the same. Work for the Emperor was clearly much more important than this conversation. Realizing that she would not achieve anything this way, Nicole moved on to more decisive actions. Taking off her outer clothing, she tried to seduce the Emperor, not realizing what a mistake it was. Zefan's hand reached out to the girl, confident in her own attractiveness. However, instead of caresses, the man grabbed her by the hair, asking if this was the most important topic of conversation. He ordered her not to come again without an invitation, otherwise Nicole would face punishment. Put out the door, the girl could not understand why her plan did not work. But he didn't have to think long. The Emperor himself explained the reason for his indifference. In his eyes, she was just another woman who couldn't do anything, who didn't even inherit any special magic. For Zefan, she is an empty place, capable only of trying to seduce him with her body. And now let's return to the present, where that same Emperor is already seducing his wife. No matter how hard she tried, Lars could not understand the reason for such sudden interest in her. And even in such a situation, she was not thinking at all about the possibility of spending the night with her husband. She was much more worried about time, of which she didn't have much left. She tried to come up with some kind of excuse, but it was all to no avail. Previously cold, the man's gaze now seemed to burn his entire body. His hands touched the girl's hair with unexpected tenderness. Zefan may have been indifferent to the others, but on this day, everything was different. He continued to convince the heroine, although not crossing the line, but being on the very brink. The Emperor said that Lars need not prove his worth and live peacefully if now she gets into his soul. Even if she lied about the attack on White Meridian, it doesn't matter to him anymore. And if after this an heir appears, the girl's position will become even stronger. The man's silhouette was reflected in the Empress's eyes, so close and soothing. You just need to reach out your hand to reach his face. Maybe this is really the best option? Lars is tired of the eternal battle with everyone around her, which is necessary in order to just live in peace. Zephon has already proposed something similar in the past. He promised to help the heroine achieve everything she wants. She just needs to become his mistress. But she, then still devoted to her family, refused. Lars thought, if she had agreed then, if she had not known all that pain, what would have happened? Could she prolong her existence a little more by being another concubine? Maybe it would be easier to be just another unremarkable girl next to the Emperor? Well, it may be easier, but this is not at all what our heroine needs. After all, she is much more significant than just a concubine, so the easy path is not for her. The Emperor did not at all expect that his proposal would be rejected. But Lars still had urgent business to attend to, and after apologizing, she pulled away from the man. Although there was little time left, she still had time, so the Empress began to get ready for the journey. All this time, Zephon watched her, disappointed and intrigued at the same time. Before leaving, Lars only paused for a moment to wish her a good night's sleep. The Emperor simply silently followed her with his gaze. Finally, the girl said that she would be the first to hug her husband, but only when she was in the mood. And now the man was left alone with his thoughts. And he was more than pleased with this outcome, because it was much more interesting. Previously, he had not met such girls, ready to prove their words with deeds, and not choosing the easy way. Now Zephon became even more interested in finding out what Lars was going to do. After quite a bit of time, the Empress's carriage was already breaking the silence of the night. Under the measured sound of wheels, the heroine thought about everything that had happened. The events of that evening still couldn't get out of my head. And the most unexpected thing for Lars was that she almost agreed. It's not that this didn't happen to her in her previous life, but there is one huge difference. This is the first time she was treated with tenderness, and at the same time given a choice. Previously, such an experience meant only another pain. Banishing the dark thoughts, Lars closed her eyes. Unconsciously, she twirled her hair on her finger, absorbed in her experiences. Even though she was able to get rid of thoughts about the past, the present worried her much more, albeit in a completely different sense. But our heroine quickly came to her senses, and she didn't regret her choice one bit. After all, what the Emperor wanted was not just another mistress. No, he needs a woman who can achieve what she wants without his help. Meanwhile, Shin stopped the carriage after noticing a problem on the road. There was a noise in the night that did not bode well. The servant suggested we wait a little before moving on. Lars asked what made Shin so nervous. It turned out that there was another carriage ahead, currently surrounded by robbers. The criminals took everything they could carry, while the carriage owners begged to at least leave them alive. While Shin was thinking about what to do, Lars had already left the carriage. The servant was surprised by his mistress's behavior. And at that moment, our heroine already realized that this was where she was going. Some group of bandits was clearly unable to scare the Empress. One of the robbers, meanwhile, full of bloodlust, had already raised his sword. A mad look was fixed on the victims who were about to die. But at the last moment, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a strange glow. Unfortunately for the man, it was already too late. He burst into flames like a match. Not understanding what was happening, the bandits looked around. But they saw only more comrades engulfed in flames. Real chaos began near the carriage. Lars, surrounded by flames that seemed to dance around her, finally caught the eye of the criminals. Not knowing who they were dealing with, some decided to fight back. But the Empress, taught by the sad experience of the war, was completely too tough for them. All that remained for these men was to look in surprise at the girl who had suddenly appeared, after which they fell one after another, burning like torches in Lars's magic. The girl was bored. It all seemed like a waste of energy. After heavy battles in the war, these robbers seemed just insects, unworthy of her attention. The heroine was surrounded, hoping to gain at least some advantage. But it was useless. Her body may have become younger, but the skills acquired over a long time remained with her. The fire even engulfed the carriage, but did not harm those inside, while preventing the robbers from getting closer. Lars struck the criminals like a natural disaster, deadly, but beautiful in its own way. All this time, Shin could only be surprised at what was happening, unable to intervene. Having finished with the bandits, Lars approached the carriage. She already knew who she would see inside, because these people were her goal. In a past life, the heroine read about this incident in the newspaper, and although the criminals were caught then, it was too late. The couple, still frightened by what happened, would have been dead if not for Lars. The girl hastened to calm the victims. She said she was just out for a walk and heard screams, so she came to help. Grateful people rejoiced at salvation, not yet knowing what awaited them. With a look full of arrogance, Lars greeted the rescued ones, pretending that she recognized them only now. The man was not just anyone, but the ruler of the kingdom of Uline. But the girl next to him was not his wife at all. As in his previous life, the king had a secret meeting with his mistress, and if this news reaches the people, and especially the queen, the man cannot avoid problems. He pretended that the heroine had made a mistake and that he was a different person. But it was enough for Lars to introduce herself and mention that they had seen each other more than once in Barry, although she looked a little different then. The king finally realized the situation he was in. Lars looked more confident than in the past, and her hair color was different now. However, it was impossible not to recognize her. The man remembered that our heroine had always been an outstanding lady, even though in society she was considered an evil woman. The king did not know what to do because the empress saved his life. But on the other hand, having learned about his secret date, she became a threat to him. Lars gave him time to think while she recalled the events of the past. The news that the king was a traitor and died along with his mistress quickly spread throughout the world, infuriating a huge number of people. The man tried to change the subject by starting a conversation about the Chariot Empire and the new empress. But it didn't work out. The heroine directly asked what they should do now. After all, if the queen finds out about what happened, the man will not get away with a simple apology. Ruler Yulin begged Lars not to reveal his secret. Lars was not against it, but she hinted that Ulen and Chariot had an extremely strained relationship, and it would be nice to fix it. She offered the king the simplest option. Right here and now, enter into an agreement with the heroine on cooperation between their countries. Meanwhile, Zephon was waiting for Lars to return, while away the time reading. It was already quite late when the empress returned to her room. The wait was too long by a man's standards. The heroine was slightly surprised by the fact that they had been waiting for her all this time. The man asked if the girl was on a secret date, to which Lars assured him that she was just going for a walk. Then Zephon asked if anything could be more important than the night spent with him. Lars didn't even bother to answer this. The man, still interested in her behavior, continued to ask questions. While the girl calmly took off her street clothes, she responded to the emperor with a letter, or rather, an agreement with the kingdom of Yulin. The emperor could not believe his eyes. No one had been able to establish such a relationship between Yulin and Chariot. Now he has little choice but to recognize Lars's value. After all, now Eliza really was not needed, and the terms of cooperation became much more profitable. The agreement was signed personally by the king, and its authenticity was not in doubt. Zephon wondered how the heroine pulled it off. Lars said it was just an accident, but the intonation said otherwise. The empress changed the subject, recalling what she said before leaving. She promised to take the first step when she was in the mood, but now it's just good. So can't she at least count on a kiss? The emperor, who had previously rejected all girls in such situations, this time was not at all against it. Besides, a little earlier, he wasn't going to just sit and wait. Following Lars's carriage, another crew was already preparing. The servants were discussing His Majesty's order to follow the Empress. Zephon wanted to find out what she was up to at all costs. Fearing that she would reveal information about Chariot to someone, he was ready to kill her if his suspicions were confirmed. However, the servants only saw how Lars, as if knowing in advance what would happen, came to the aid of King Yulain, dealt with the criminals with her monstrous magic, and then threatened the rescued, eventually receiving this agreement. The servants had already conveyed this information to Zephon, not forgetting to mention that it looked like Lars had planned everything. Therefore, now the Emperor, maybe not completely, but trusted his wife, and was forced to admit that she was indeed more valuable than an ordinary concubine. The moment their bodies touched, he wondered if she was a witch if she could make him recognize her. The night passed, and the morning rays illuminated the palace. Lars was combing her hair, and all her thoughts were occupied by the Emperor. In the morning, he acted as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had happened. Zephon did not become softer or friendlier. Even in the carriage, he rode silently. After all, he has 6 mistresses? Maybe he just wanted to test the Empress? If this is so, then this is at least some progress. However, at that moment, did he really notice how Lars's hands were shaking? The Empress was completely at a loss, and this depressed her. She tried her best to calm herself down. And Shin, who was standing next to him, did not understand at all what was happening. What depresses Lars most is that at that very moment, she remembered what happened in her past life. Unable to change anything, the heroine could only regret. Tired of heavy thoughts, the Empress decided to just relax and see what would happen next. To distract herself, she asked her faithful servant if he had ever braided his hair. The man apologized and said he never did this. However, after a couple of moments, he made every effort to give Lars a beautiful hairstyle. And at that time, the Empress herself was thinking that it didn't matter how the night went. The main thing was that she had already begun to prove her worth by concluding an agreement with the traitor king. At that moment, her thoughts were interrupted by noise from the street. It turned out that it was Eliza, who was being forcibly sent home to the kingdom of Yulin, screaming. Her retinue was lost. The girls did not know what to do if the fourth concubine was kicked out of the castle. Eliza began to say that the servants had no right to treat the emperor's concubine like that. But her words were interrupted by the most unpleasant news for her. Zephon himself gave the order. He kicked her out of the palace, so now relations with Yulain are improved, and Eliza is no longer needed. The girl did not believe the servants and began to demand a meeting with His Majesty. Lars, who was watching everything, did not expect that the emperor would so easily abandon his concubine. But this was only to her advantage, and having said goodbye to her now former rival in absentia, the empress continued to enjoy her vacation. Meanwhile, the emperor was thinking about everything that he had learned about Lars from the servants who were watching her. He no longer had any doubt that she had met the king of Yulin. The empress acted as if she knew that the carriage would be attacked. And her magic, with the help of which she destroyed the robbers, is amazing. At the time of signing the agreement, she was still pouring out threats, and no matter how you look at it, this meeting cannot be called accidental. Apparently, she even knew that the king would be with his mistress, and no one could understand how she could plan this. And as a result, an agreement on trade and friendly cooperation with the kingdom of Yulin was in Zephon's hands. Even an emotionless person like him couldn't hold back. He imagined how he and the empress would behave if King Yulin really sent the invitation to the reception that he had promised. Thoughts about Lars flashed through one after another, but the realization of this did not come immediately. The memory of how he tenderly held her hand last night never left her mind. Zephon only now noticed this warm feeling that fills him every time he thinks about Lars. It seemed that he did not believe himself, but his heart stubbornly insisted that he was not at all indifferent to this girl. The next morning, the sun again flooded everything around, tearing out the majestic walls of the palace from the darkness of the night. And the girl was preparing for the new day, all this time only observing the actions of the empress, the sixth concubine. Unlike her, our heroine's morning did not start out so pleasantly for the third time. Whoever it is, he is a very diligent person. Every day, like an alarm clock, he does the same thing. It's not that it does much harm, but it's also impossible to leave everything as it is. After all, today again, someone sent a very peculiar gift, the corpse of a cat in a box. This has been going on ever since Eliza left, and the culprit has still not been found. Lars ordered to do the same as usual. Then she said that although she doesn't have the habit of eating cats, she could try cooking? Of course, it was a joke, but Shin didn't understand it until the heroine said it directly. The empress showed with all her appearance that for her, this was something frivolous and not worth attention. But in fact, she would have been shaking from just the sight of blood, if not for her past life. During the war, she managed to see many corpses of both people and animals. This continued in the dungeon, where dead rats lay next to her, and in Barry, where she returned after imprisonment and where dead animals were thrown at her. Lars has been through too much, and now the corpses are just corpses that do not evoke any special emotions, except perhaps regret. And now she was calmly thinking about what to do next and how to look for the culprit. By this time, breakfast was already ready. Having tasted only a small piece, Lars put the cutlery aside. She ordered to gather everyone who worked in the kitchen, as well as other servants. The people who came were noticeably nervous, not understanding why the empress suddenly called them. She asked everyone to try the salad that she had just started eating. The servants obediently carried out the order, although they did not know why this was necessary. But in the next moment, they understood everything. Lars said that was enough, and they could spit out what they were going to eat. There were few cats, and now there was poison in the food. The empress advised her to rinse her mouth to get rid of the poison, and all this time she stared intently at the chief maid. The heroine already understood who the culprit was and did not delay the punishment. She directly told the maid that she knew everything and could not do anything. She would have to bear responsibility for this. Taking the plate in her hands, Lars said that there was so much food left, and it was a pity to throw it away. So someone has to eat it. The unconscious maid was carried away. The empress said that such a cheap poison could be ignored, but there is a limit to everything. Meanwhile, Shin jokingly suggested finding a better poison. Lars replied that as soon as she needs it, she will immediately inform you. Our heroine was not particularly worried, because she had been trained since childhood to develop immunity to poisons, and was also forced to learn a huge amount of information about them. And even this she did for the sake of her brother and sister, to check whether there was poison in their food. Suddenly, the heroine realized who was most likely behind everything. The one who had the closest relationship with the main maid, who could come up with the idea with cats and poison, and who got rid of everyone with whom the emperor became close. Namely, the sixth concubine, who apparently has finally begun to act. A little later, Zephon was reported about the attempt to poison the empress. The servant reported that the head maid was the culprit. Zephon immediately asked about the condition of his wife, to which he was told that she did not have time to eat much poison, spitting out the first piece of poisoned food. They didn't forget to tell us about the maid, who is now in a pre-fainting state. Having learned that the empress personally recognized the presence of poison in the food and who had added it, Zephon smiled, which surprised everyone present. The emperor ordered the head maid to be interrogated and then to get rid of her and to send a court doctor to Lars. After examining the girl, the doctor said that everything was fine. You just need to drink more water and not strain for the next 3 days, just in case. Our heroine did not at all expect that the emperor would send a doctor and did not know how to react to this. In addition, she is still immune to poisons. Even in prison, she did not die from poisoning. And even then, in a past life, all attempts to poison the heroine also belonged to the sixth concubine. Lars now regretted that she suspected Sasha that time. Meanwhile, warm energy emanated from the doctor's hands. The man explained that this is the magic of calm, which will help alleviate the empress's condition. In response to gratitude, he only said that it was his job to ensure the empress's calm state. Lars wondered who he was and where he was from. Probably a member of some royal family that knew magic. And the doctor called the heroine the treasure of the empire and the only girl capable of helping the emperor in ruling the country. Having finished her conversation with the man, the empress turned to the invited servants, who were afraid that they would meet the same fate as the head maid. However, instead, they received a considerable amount of money as compensation for having also taken poison. Lars did this because these people did not intend to harm her, and now they will also be grateful. The servants' opinions of the empress began to change, and now that the head maid was not around to spread rumors, they saw her better side. The servants will discuss our heroine's generosity for a long time. Lars watched them, pleased with the results of her actions. Now most of the people working in the palace will go over to her side. Meanwhile, the sixth concubine, thinking over how to get rid of the empress, wrote her a letter. Lars did not expect to receive it at all, especially since instead of the expected threats, it contained an invitation to dinner. What awaits our heroine at this reception?